upload your presentation. Aditi, thank you. Great. So our next presenter is another ex-SAFS IRD student, Tim, who's actually been working for a long while with aquaculture in Africa. So we're now going to move to Africa and aquaculture. And we'll be with you sorting it out at the moment. If you go into presentation mode.
Yeah, I just moved it to the wrong screen. Hang on a second. Let me bring that over there. How's that looking?
Okay, that's right. We've got it written there. Tim has been involved in aquaculture in Africa for a number of years. It's also it's an area that I've tried to encourage a number of African students to get involved with to see how aquaculture can actually help with food supply, protein, nutrition, as well as in terms of developing a more resilient community. And I always kept up with what Tim's been doing, what comes out on LinkedIn and whatever else that you promote what's happening. So I've followed with interest what you're doing, Tim, and it's nice to have a presentation on it. So over to you.
Yes, well, hello everybody, and it's good to be here virtually. I owe quite a lot to the RAU. I did my master's there, and it really was with Richard that I did my thesis. I did it in Zanzibar on aquaculture, and it was a bit of an unknown to me at that time. I didn't know much about aquaculture, and I spent that time sort of quickly getting to grips with it, and have sort of fallen in love with fish. So definitely encourage those who are interested in a future in agriculture to consider aquaculture. I know perhaps if you're in England, it's not as common as it is in Scotland, but it's fantastic, and the best animal protein there is fish. So without further ado, let me just start on the presentation. So I guess the context is obviously important, and I don't want to go over too much on this because I know that we will have heard a lot of this already and you'll be aware of it. But essentially, if you think of the perfect storm as developed by Benton and Godfrey, 2010, growing human population, climate change, increased resource consumption leads to this term, the perfect storm. How are we going to feed everybody? And that's the question really that I spent a lot of time thinking about and contributing in my small way towards that. If we look in history, I think this is quite an interesting point, and I won't spend too long, but if you're interested in this, go and have a look, because I think it's fascinating to see how humans have changed our consumption and relationship to farming and food over the centuries. Most production increases have happened through improved technology, intensification, bringing new land into production. And that's really how we fed people as our population has exploded. Current predictions, of course, need to double. So how do we do that? If you look at the 18th and 19th century, the Green Revolution, we've had these huge leaps in food production globally. But like I say, these have generally come from technology, improvements, intensification, new land. And the problem we've got currently is that we don't really have any new land available for farming. So we've got to work with what we have already, what's already in production, and increase the yield. And I posit that sub-Saharan Africa is the greatest place that we can see those yields increases because on average, the yields are fairly low, and they haven't changed a huge amount since the 1960s, really. Whereas other parts of the world have seen huge increases in production yields for the land that they're producing. Population growth, of course, is going up, and I bring this up really for that last point about Uganda, because that's where we're going to head shortly, to Uganda. So if you look at the birth rate, it's phenomenal. It's the second youngest global population. I think it's 85% of the population are 30 or under, or 35 or under, which is just incredible. I'm 39 now, so I was one of the old people, that 15% that were sort of above 35. And it's a really young nation. Of course, climate change is having a big impact, but let me just bring this up because this is the impact it has on fisheries. So you can see there um, uh, the big changes in catches, potential catches, and those big red areas. That's where a lot of global cat. We can't rely on wild capture, and you'll see why in a second. But climate change is just going to make things worse. In Uganda, we see big problems with climate change because of changes in weather. In fact, across the East Africa region, they're severely impacted by climate change, and we've seen, big problems with maize um, because of droughts and too much rain and all these different types of things. Now, this is about a fish, really, this whole topic. So let's have a quick look at this, and then we'll get to the meat of this presentation, which is Uganda and what I'm doing out there. So broadly speaking, the light blue bar at the bottom is the capture. So, fishing. Most of that has remained relatively constant. You can see how constant that is over the last sort of 30 years or so. And it's about 90 million tons. Then you've got aquaculture, which has just exploded in terms of production volume. So when I first did this 4 years ago, it was at 73 million tons, global aquaculture. Now it's at 87 million tons. So it's about half of all fish that's consumed globally is aquaculture. In Uganda, where we're going to shortly, the food security from fish is tremendously important, and that's mostly down to Lake Victoria, which is this huge lake, and there's a huge amount of capture fisheries that come there. And actually, it's about 30 million Ugandans who are some way related and linked to that lake in terms of food security. So it's a big source of fish in the region. But as many parts of the world, there's been a huge amount of overfishing because there's so much pressure on the lake in terms of fishing. That's just one of the challenges. And so the decline in catch has been fairly steady since 2006. And so aquaculture has come up and filled some of that gap. Now, here we are over to Uganda now. So aquaculture in Uganda really started in the 1950s. And you can talk about two periods of aquaculture really, and it's this first period is from the 1950s to the end of the century, and during that time it was it sort of grew fairly rapidly. The Amin era didn't help with all the aquaculture ponds that had been set up, but after that sort of became once he'd left, became a bit more stable, but not much changed really. But then at the turn of the century, there's a big increase and focus on aquaculture as a means to improve food security, reduce poverty. And so concerted efforts became, let's develop aquaculture. And they've got very ambitious aquaculture production targets. So they're trying to get 1 million tons by the end of 2030, which is, to be honest, I think if you talk to anybody that even within the government, people realize that's a very ambitious target and perhaps not very realistic. And if you consider that the baseline at the moment is around 35 million tons, this is not achievable. But I guess what it points to is an ambitious target to rapidly expand aquaculture within the country. Now, pond production actually is quite a small proportion of this. You can see there it's about 2 to 6% of that, and the rest is done in cages. I could talk a bit about cages and some of the big players, but that's not really the target of this workshop seminar, because we'll want to focus on the smallholders, right? And smallholders generally are doing ponds. There are some smaller operations doing cages, but by and large, they are pond producers. So it's 20,000 ponds throughout the country, about 500 meters squared per farmer. And the thing that's changed, I talked about there's two periods of aquaculture really. From the turn of the century, there's been a shift in smallholder pond production. And so you're getting these more, let's call them commercial farmers, who are actually making profits from fish farming, who are expanding who are bringing increasing numbers of fish to the market. So that's about 20 to 30% is estimate of people that are moving from subsistence to smallholder pond farming. And of those farmers, um, they've nearly got 5,000 ponds, so that's the 20 to 30% there. And the average size is a bit bigger because they'll have multiple ponds often. So my after the REU, and I'm sorry for flashing up another university on screen, but I just did that. This is where I did my PhD research back in 2017. So after the MSc, I went and thought, right, I don't quite know enough about aquaculture yet. Let me go and spend some time in country. So the best part of it was the field work, of course. That's probably the most enjoyable for anybody doing research. I actually got to, you see the places in red is where I went to visit and did a lot of data collection. And I was based in the Rukungiri district, which is the long skinny one at the bottom there. And I spoke to a lot of different people, and really the focus of what I was trying to do is moving away from specific sort of what I call hard science, the technical stuff about aquaculture, to more, well, what is it that smallholders are dealing with in the country? How are they producing fish, and what are their challenges? What are their opportunities? And so I spent a lot of time talking to people, open-ended questionnaires, that type of thing, days just spent with people. And that was my work, to really try to understand the industry at a depth. And yeah, a lot of you will be familiar with this theory, so the sustainable livelihoods approach, Chambers and Conway, 1990s. And I think, this has perhaps fallen out of vogue, as it were, but this approach, the sustainable livelihoods approach, I think the thing that really helps me with it is understanding that smallholders are not just doing one activity. And I think that's one of the big differences. So, when I'm trying to explain, I now live up in Scotland, but when I'm trying to explain to my neighbours about smallholders, that people think, well, what's their job? They think, oh, they're just a fish farmer. Well, it's not. That's perhaps a Western way of looking at it, because we know that smallholders often have lots of different income streams, and pond farming will just be one of those incomes. And so it's important to understand that, I think, when you tackle any type of livelihoods or looking at smallholders, is realizing that people are not just tomato farmers, they're not just maize growers, they're not just fish farmers in this case. They will do a lot of different activities to generate income. And there's a whole framework behind it. You can go and have a look at it. But a lot of it is, of course, about alleviating risk. So you're not putting everything in, all your eggs into one basket, to use the farming pun there. But you are actually helping yourself, future-proofing yourself against risk, if in case one thing fails, you've got another source of income. And this is a critical way of thinking about smallholders, especially when it comes to ponds, because they're not doing this necessarily as their sole way of working. So let's just have a look at a typical farmer, pond farmer, so you can understand what people are doing. So this is Warren. Is a typical farmer. You can see there is 2 ponds, and there was 3 ponds are in the picture. What's his profile? So 65 years old, he's a retired teacher, quite well educated, relatively wealthy. And the reason I can say that is because he's got 5 children, he's paid for their degrees, so that shows a sign of wealth in this context. And he set up farming because, source of income, but also to provide food for the community, fish being, of course, the best animal protein. I'll say that again. And so he's trying to feed people, but also generate some income. So he set this up as what often be called a demonstration farm. What's he feeding his fish? Well, he's using sort of yam leaves, perhaps a bag of pellets, not as much as he needs, but just a little bit. So he's not spending too much on this. But the problem that he had was, when he was setting up his ponds, the cost tripled because he didn't really know what he was doing, and I'll explain why in a second. But you might ask, well, why has he got into this? And I think this quote, is just great, because it really sort of talks about his rationale. So he just said, I've been watching fish farming on television. I've been seeing cage fish farming because it seems to be very productive. I can see people harvesting fish like Irish potatoes and earning a lot of money. So that's why I picked the interest. And this sort of approach in Uganda was very common. The rise of social media, television spots, it's all sort of glorifying fish farming and saying, well, let's do this. This can generate a bunch of income for you. And people sort of dive into it head first. And sometimes they don't quite know what they're doing. And so they can end up with difficulties, and it doesn't really work out very well because when they start out, full of enthusiasm, but perhaps lack some of the skills to avoid the classic pitfalls. So this is the mistake that he did. So essentially, one of the ponds there on the right, it's the same pond actually. He did it and he got the slope wrong, so then he's had to remove that pond and build it elsewhere just to make sure that it holds water over time. And so it's quite an expensive process to do that because you've got to bring in people to dig the ground, you've got to fill it back in, you've wasted some materials, some sacks that you've used to line the walls. So it's an expensive problem for him. But this is a typical farmer in the region, somebody that has a bit of enthusiasm for it, has a bit of spare money, throws it at this, and then can easily get disappointed because if his costs have tripled, how is he going to make this work? And I think in terms of trying to understand what farmers need, I think you can see quite clearly, you can start to separate things out, right? So there's a focus on the technical often, which is things like hatcheries, the seed, the fry and the fingerlings, the baby fish, and then feed quality. And those are that's really what people tend to focus on when they're looking at let's help smallholder farmers to increase production. It's those technical, the hard science type thing that I referenced. And those are, of course, critically important. I'm not saying that they're not important. They are very important. But I think often what happens is the softer, more nuanced parts of successful farming, and this is broadly applicable not just to fish farming, I would suggest, but to other farming systems, those get missed. So the non-technical, so things like market access and affordability. So where are you going to sell your fish? How are you going to get it to market? You're harvesting with ponds, you harvest in one go. So suddenly you've got 3, 4, 5,000 fish that you need to sell. It's a perishable item, of course. So how do you sell it so quickly? That's a consideration you've got to think about if you're a farmer. So the knowledge, so in this case, the gentleman had made some mistakes in his initial planning. Has the person who's actually managing the farm, are they actually doing it correctly? Like I've seen some terrible practices of people just putting pig intestines into ponds. Tilapia, by the way, are vegetarian, so they don't eat that, or herbivorous. So what are you going to do then? The training mechanisms to train up staff. People don't keep records. Is there career progression? The infrastructure to actually, ice machines, those types of things. So the point I do to highlight this is actually when you start looking at supporting smallholders, there's an awful lot of challenges that they have that go beyond just the technical stuff of which, important. Can you get access to fingerlings? Are they of good quality? Can you afford the feed? Is it good quality? Do you know how often to feed them? That technical stuff is important, but then so are the other parts of this. And I think there's a government program called Operation Wealth Creation. It's now finished in Uganda. There's a new program which is very similar, called it by a different name, but this one ran for a number of years. And the idea was, it says it's in the description, you're trying to create wealth for farmers. And so what government would do is they would give them free fingerlings and free feed. So it's classically focusing on the technical. But that was as far as the program went. And the delivery of those free technical inputs was by the army because of allegations of corruption and et cetera, et cetera. But the army had no experience in handling fish, had no experience in fish farming. And so they turn up at the farm and it's basically just fish in a bag. You don't know how long the fish have been there. Often they've been poorly treated, so they die. So by the time the farmer actually gets them, a lot of the fish haven't survived, and then they're not given any training on how to use the fish feed, and so there's problems there with spoilage and wastage. All to show, I think, that um, delivering and improving on fish farming is a complex activity, and it goes way beyond just the technical of this is how you do, this is what you need. You need your fingerlings and you need your feed, and that's how you do it. So with that in mind, I decided actually I'm quite interested in this, but I want to sort of be boots on the ground and do something about it. And so in 2021, I went and set up RAD, or Rural Aquaculture Development, in Rukungiri in Western Uganda with Pawson, who's my business partner. And the idea really was we wanted to provide everything that farmers needed to succeed in fish farming. Now, it's not a charity, it's a commercially viable business model, because I thought, well, it's farming. There has to be a financial reason for doing this. It has to make money. So that's the sort of the premises. And that's important actually for me as a white person going to Africa. Often in rural Africa, people will just look at me and think, oh, here's a funder. And I have to sort of get rid of that sorry, I'm back. I think you lost me for a moment. So commercially viable is important. With Pawson, it's obviously a bit easier. He's Ugandan, so he didn't have that problem. So smallholders in mind, really, what do they need to succeed? And that is the question that we often asked ourselves, and even now as the farm is ongoing, we want to know what it is that farmers need and how can we provide that in a hub model. So we have 3 objectives. Poverty reduction. We want to increase income for farmers, but we also want to give wages to people. Food security. We want access to affordable fish for all, and that last part I think is important. Fish. Another great quote from somebody, an older gentleman, who said to me, fish used to be the poor man's food, but now it's the rich man's food. And actually that just reflects the change in practice in Uganda of the cost of fish has just increased as they've become more scarce in the lake. And so now, even though it is the best protein for people to eat, it's expensive. And so we want to make fish affordable to everybody. And of course, we want to do that in an environmentally restorative way. There are ways of farming which aren't great for the environment, and we want to make sure that what we're doing is going to benefit the environment. So that was our aim. So how did we actually do this? Well, we started off with what we're calling a hub farm, right? So it's a core place where you have someone who's entrepreneurial, so it's commercially viable, somebody that understands the local challenges and aims to address them creatively. So it has to be. So I wouldn't have done this if I didn't have Pawson with me, because what do I understand about that local area? It would take me years to really understand the pains and the livelihoods of farmers. And so I partnered very deliberately with a local to deliver this. They have to be able to work and train farmers, because the idea is that we are helping farmers to succeed. And we want to build a network built on trust, because ultimately the hub farm operates with a bunch of farms around it, and that creates a network, right? And that trust between the different people in the network is important, because otherwise, without trust, you can't achieve much. So you have the hub farm, and then surrounding this, you have a number of farms that operate and benefit from the services that the hub farm can provide. So farms, they operate autonomously, but they're part of a best practice community. And really, we were trying to move away from sort of an off-taker model, where ownership is really with a central body, or with a cooperative, where sometimes decision making can be quite difficult to achieve because everyone owns everything. And so we ended up with this balance where actually the hub farm is an independent body, and it has commercial relationships built on trust, where farmers can operate independently and they don't have to buy in through a contractor or anything like that, but you do it relationally, the buy-in. Farmers are paid transparent and fair rates for the fish. So you'll see in a moment, I'll go through the services that we provide, but any financial transaction between the hub farm and the companion farms or the cluster farms needs to be transparent and fair in order to keep trust going. And really, that's incredibly important in any context. But in Uganda, with high rates of corruption, there's a sort of degree of importance there because there is problems with money and how people handle it, and people are always sort of looking over their shoulder to make sure they're not being cheated. And so having a transparent and fair rate for fish, which is widely known, helps everybody to achieve that trust that we need. Farms will buy inputs from the hub farm on a commercial basis. So what I mean by that is some of the technical things that we're talking about, because those are important. So the fingerlings, there's some stuff about feed with BSF. We'll talk about that in a second. But it's on a commercial basis, just to emphasize it's not a handout. And then farms can access free advice and support through this. And so those non-technical parts that we were talking about, those are provided by the hub, but it's done in a sort of, there are formal training events, but a lot of it's on that one-to-one, as you're engaging with farms that are on your periphery, you are helping them to improve production. That benefits you as the hub farm, but it also benefits the farmer. And so that knowledge exchange, which is so important and key to improving pond farming, we see that happen on a regular basis. So what services do we offer? And these are the services. So the first thing is a hatchery. The second thing is feed through BSF or black soldier fly, which are the maggots, very high in protein. They eat anything organic. So we use that. There's a cold chain as well attached to this. The market, very critical. We talked about the problems for farmers trying to sell their products, and then equipment and expertise. And I'll go through each of these in detail so you can understand the type of thing that we're doing in Uganda. So the hatchery. Now, when I went out there, I have to be honest, I didn't want to do a hatchery. And the reason was there's a technical skill that you need to do a hatchery well. I didn't want to the volumes that we wanted to produce in terms of fingerlings. That's what the small baby fish that we need to produce are fairly small, and so we wouldn't want to spend a lot of money on building a very grand hatchery. And so I was thinking, well, why would I do this? Because this is just it's a big headache for us as a core farm to operate this. But actually, Pawson, the value of partnership, Pawson kept talking about this hatchery and said, look, we need to do this. And actually, eventually, we sort of agreed that this is something that farmers need. And I guess it's because where we're based, we're about 8 hours away from sort of the nearest source of reputable fingerlings. And because farmers are accessing, say, 1,000, 5,000 fingerlings, they'll come in. The way they pack fish is I don't have any pictures here, but they put them in these big blow-up bags, plastic see-through bags. You pump it full of oxygen. Half of there's half water in there, and then the oxygen that you've put in, so from a tank, they get quite tight. But that high oxygen in the water keeps going into the water, and then the fish can breathe, and they can last in there for up to about 24 hours, although you wouldn't go much past that. Or you put less time in the bag, the better. And you transport them when they're around 2 grams or so they're quite tiny. But so farmers were getting these bags, and so if you're getting, say you only want 1,000, you've got a small pond, you need about maybe 2 bags. And getting those 8 hours away, no farmer's going to travel that far to get that level of fish. Maybe you ask someone to send them to you, but then how do you know the contact? And then it gets on a bus. The person that's putting it into luggage doesn't know what these things are, just chucks them in, the bag breaks, all sorts of issues. So really, the other problem I think with this is that farmers often aren't sure of the source, and so there's that trust point there. How can they trust fish in a bag, as I referenced. That do they know where it's come from? Is it reputable? There's lots of inbreeding. So is the quality of what you're getting any good? So in order for us to really, what do small holders need to succeed? Go back to that question. We decided actually we need to do this hatchery. Um, and actually, so we went to Lake Chogo, which was like a 12-hour trip, caught some wild fish, brought them back. So we've got good quality fingerlings. And we've actually just yesterday got a fairly large order um, from our local government. And so we can start distributing these to the farmers, and they're going to give some of these free inputs. The difference, I think, between this and Operation Wealth Creation references, because we're the hatchery providing the fingerlings, we will have direct contact with the farmers in our location, and it just gives us another opportunity to bring people into our network and to encourage them to help them to succeed in pond farming. So actually, it's turning out pretty good. So we're quite happy with that. That forecasting there, I think, is an important part of it. So we are buying fish from farmers, and anybody that tells you anything about markets knows you need to have a constant supply for a market. So by being the ones providing the fingerlings, it helps us to forecast when we will have fish available for the market, because we can work backwards from when we're supplied the fingerlings. And of course, it's a source of income from us as well. It's not a bulk of our income, but it does help pay the bills. So, obviously we use that. You can see there the teamwork. That's us sorting out some of the catching some of the brood stock and then moving them around. The eggs, tilapia, are mouth brooders, so you can see the eggs there in the mouth of the fish. And then there's a sampling some of the old. These aren't fingerlings; these are just older fish at this point. So that's one of the services we provide. The next one is feed and BSF, and you can see there's a bunch of logos. That's because at the top, that's because we were funded through KTN, who I used to work for. That sounds very corrupt, doesn't it? And I'm sorry, because it was totally impartial. The people that knew me, they took themselves out of the judging. So apologies for making that sound like there was some favors exchanged, because there definitely wasn't. Everybody was very above board. Anyway, my point is, to get sidetracked, we wanted to show and demonstrate the relevance of using BSF in pond aquaculture. Now, a lot of the work on BSF, black soldier fly. Sorry, I should explain a wee bit about black soldier fly. Black soldier fly, the larvae, the maggots, are very high in protein. Can be between 40 to 60%. They can grow from 5-day-old hatchling to something that can be eaten at 0.2 grams in about 3 or 4 weeks. So they're high in protein. They eat anything organic, and so there's a big buzz about them being an alternative source of protein. But the industry is really focused on creating alternatives. So instead of using fish meal or soya, you grind the BSF down into powder, and then you use that as a replacement. There are challenges with that. One is scaling. You need a lot of substrate to meet the volumes, so waste for the black soldier fly to feed on, to meet the volumes that industry needs to replace fish meal. And you've also got processing challenges because they're very oily. So how do you process that? You've got chitin in there as well, which is not good for a lot of species, because it basically makes you constipated. So there are challenges with BSF as an alternative protein. But what we were trying to do is actually, why don't we just feed them in whole to the ponds? Because you bypass a lot of the problems. And because you're doing pond farming, which is relatively small scale, you don't need huge amounts of waste or substrate. You don't have to worry about the oil because you're not grinding them or drying them. You're just feeding them directly to the ponds. And quite frankly, the fish really like it. We found during the trial that we did, fish will often prefer them, I guess, because you throw them in live, they're wriggling around. That sort of simulates a wild sort of behavior, and the fish will go for it. So this is the trial that we did, and what we were trying to show was what difference does it make if you feed fish with BSF, live BSF, as a 66% inclusion rate on a diet, and then 33% of that is commercial pellet, which is sort of the standard that best practice would be potentially feeding 100% on commercial pellets. And so these are the results here. And basically what we found was there was no significant difference. If anything, the, the fish fed and BSF did slightly better in performance. And so that is something that we are providing for farmers. And the reason it's so important um, is the cost. It's pure and simple. If you look there at the commercial price for a pellet, it's about 22 pence to produce the fish, or actually it costs us 11 pence to if we're using it 66%. And actually, since then we've gone up to about 80% BSF because we think the fish can take that. And so you've got a drastic reduction in cost in terms of feeding fish. So it's very affordable to farmers and who are very often very poor and can't afford big bags of commercial feed. It's fairly easy to do. So what we do is we've changed slightly how we do things. So we were going to provide eggs, BSF eggs to farmers and sell those, but now actually we do 5-day-old larvae, which are teeny tiny. You send them off to the farmer. They have organic waste lying around, and then they feed that to the maggots. They then get the maggots when they're ready after 2 or 3 weeks, feed them directly to the fish, and what's left is fertilizer or frass. And actually, we haven't really been able to quantify a lot of the benefits of frass, but there's a lot of research that is coming out looking at the benefits of frass, which is it's basically the droppings of the maggots once they've been through their gut, and it's incredibly good fertilizer. So quite a few trials I've seen indicate that it does better than your standard NKP pellets, the fertilizer that you would buy in bags. So because it's full of organic matter, and I remember John at the ROU talking very much about soil health. So I don't pretend that I know much about it at all, but I know that there's some absolute magic there in terms of benefiting plants that are growing. So to sort of summarize, by providing these larvae to farmers, they can grow them quickly. They end up with a fertilizer, which is really good. And of course, the hub, we get a bit of income from selling the maggots, and we sell them fairly reasonable. There's pictures there of the bays where we do the maggot. We've got the feed. Farmers don't need to do this; they can do it in buckets, so they don't need the volumes. We've got the polytunnel there for breeding of the flies, and then there's the trial in the middle there, is with the happers in the water to have the different cohorts of fish. So that's the third thing that we're offering. The fourth thing, sorry, that's the second, isn't it? This is the third thing. Cold chain. This is the other part of the services that the hub model offers to farmers. So I'll go through the pictures first. So we've got there some fish and some of the tilapia from our farm on ice. You've got the ice machine there in the background. We had a visitor, Think Aqua, named. They're the ones that helped pay for that machine. And then there's a typical market there on the right. You can see big piles of dried and smoked fish. There's the mukeni, which is tiny little fish from the lake in big piles, but there's no cold chain whatsoever in the market. And the challenge of smoking fish or drying fish is often the conditions in which it's done are pretty poor. The quality of the product is severely diminished. You lose a lot of the fats, the omega-3s that are dripping out of the fish as you're doing it, which is a lot of the nutritional value. And so it's not really an ideal way of selling fish. Well, I've just seen the time. I need to get a shift on. So this has really helped us because farmers can access ice. We can extend the harvest time for fish, and the quality is really much improved. Next, the market. So affordable fish for all is our motto. And actually what we've decided to do is we don't sell we don't sell big fish, which is what people are used to, 500 grams, because they can't afford it. Because if you work out the price per kilo, so actually we sell smaller fish, which is people aren't used to that, but we've created a market for that, and a regular market where hawkers come in and they buy fish from us, and we pay them a wage, and then they go and sell it. You can see there it's preparing for a big child's centre basically, where they buy fish in. The other thing we offer, of course, is equipment and expertise. And here is doing some training event with some farmers at the bottom, some on-staff training, and then a local school that came in to have a look at our systems. So I'm gonna have to rush through this because of time. So I think you can clearly see that first lot, this is a previous slide, the technical, the hatcheries, the seed, the feed, yes, we provide that for farmers, right? But we also provide a lot of the non-technical. And I think that is the key difference maker, that we're not just providing a few things that farmers need, but we're trying to provide everything that farmers need to succeed. The long-term vision of what we're trying to do, and I'm back in the UK now. The farm is still going, and it's growing, and it's developing, and it's expanding into with helping more farmers. Just running a normal business, I guess. But really, what we would like to do is to launch further hubs within East Africa. We think this is a viable model because it hits a lot of the key points that I'm trying to achieve. It reduces poverty. Improves food security, and does it in an environmentally restorative way. I haven't talked about that really, but it does the way that we farm. And we believe that we can actually deliver this in a way that is self-sustaining as well. And then the long-term plan is to create sort of like we're calling nests, so it's a network of entrepreneurs of sustainable tilapia. The idea is that these hubs can come together and start to benefit and aggregate, and there's sort of a benefit to networks, isn't there, as we well know, and so we want to connect those up and bring benefit to that. There's sort of 3 levels to this model. So you've got the smallholder level. Sorry, I think I disappeared for a moment. So smallholder level there is that the current threshold of poverty in Uganda is about $1.77 a day. By our calculations, people are making around $250 in profit for the year if they sort of start doing pond farming, which is a considerable amount of their income. And if you remove the labor costs, which we did include in this, then that's a 72% increase on their income per year. And we have here some of the sort of calculations behind that. But this is them operating 2 ponds, very minimal amount, selling fish back to the hub, but they of course get a price for that. But there's definitely a profit there to be made for smallholders. So that's the first layer. The next layer is the hub operator. So this is what's been set up in Rad Rukungiri. But of course, there's an income there for the hub operator because they're making money from the services that they're selling. They are themselves a farm as well, so they make money from selling fish. But at full capacity, if they're reaching 100 smallholders, which is our projected figures, then you've got 12 full-time staff. You've got 38 people that are selling fish directly, the hawkers. And then, of course, the indirect benefits to the local community. You've got 65 tons of affordable. That's the point, right? So it's reaching everybody, not just the wealthy that can buy big fish, but people that can buy the small fish, of affordable, high quality protein. And then the third, again, this is the breakdown of the income and expenses for the hub models. And then you've got the third layer, the high level, which is the RAD operator. So that is sort of what I'm trying to develop with in partnership with Think Aqua, who are an aquaculture-based NGO here in the UK. But we're talking at the moment with a couple of funders about expanding this model into other parts of East Africa at the moment, but I think it could be scaled elsewhere. And this is the sort of the higher level where actually our job is to deliver the hubs and make sure that they have an opportunity to succeed and bring fish farming across East Africa. So that's the end of my presentation. Nicely on time, and sorry for rushing there at the end, but I think you can see the model that we've developed. I'm excited about it. I think you probably would have caught some of my passion throughout, but I really think that smallholders are at the heart of aquaculture production, and can be because of the things that we've just been talked about at the start of this series. But they definitely need something to succeed. It isn't just a case of giving them a few technical points and say, "Oh, right, off you go and do things." There is a complexity to farming and smallholder management that needs to bring benefit to them. But I think this hub model really works and provides some of that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Excellent presentation, and great to get an update on how things are going. I haven't got a question. I've just really got an observation that might help you, and that is that it would be really good for TAAI to have some way of maybe having some expertise around aquaculture and emerging economies. And it may be that part of your network might be able to use the resources of the TAI website. It may be worth discussing that going forward at some time in the future. Paul, I don't know whether you feel the same, that this might be a good group to try and get involved with us.
Yes, indeed. For a start, Tim's group could become a partner organisation, for example.
Yeah.
And that would then, he could use that as part of his promotion. And also, of course, we could even form a aquaculture subgroup, perhaps. Pooling all the expertise in the TAA International on aquaculture, because I know there are others who have experience of aquaculture. And
I think as well, those who are operating in Uganda, and that the cost of just one of those becoming a member is only £10, and therefore it becomes a good link to it. For RAD as well, it would also be a way in which you could expand your ability to offer services. So I think there's some opportunities there, Tim, that we could maybe talk about outside. But however, I think I'd like to see if there's anyone who's got any further questions they'd like to ask Tim before we break for lunch. John.
Very tiny comment, if I may.
John Wibley, just going to make a comment.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tim. That's terrific. Just the thought is, you've got another ready paper there for the AgForDev Journal of the TAAI. And you were talking about my favourite fish, and I've long been concerned by the drop in the catch from Lake Victoria, and keen to encourage fish farms wherever I can. And you've got an excellent model there. So please be encouraged, and thank you for sharing with us.
Yeah, I think on that, just following up on John's comment there, Tim, if you became a member, it's £60 for you to become a member. You would not have to pay to have your paper published in the journal. So, which is actually probably cheaper than trying to get it published in an open journal somewhere else. So just a thought on that. I mean, okay, we're doing the hard sell. Apologies for that. Is there anyone online that wants to pick up any questions or observations?
Yeah, just.
Oh, there's one more in the audience here, Ray.
Yeah.
Should be on.
That's on, is it? Okay.
No, press the square.
Oh, that's it. Yes, you're starting off, Tim. It's very interesting indeed down in the southwest of Uganda. As if you haven't got enough to do else. What about this sort of fish farming over the rest of Uganda, the northern parts and so on? It's a bit further away for you.
So I think.
What are your thoughts on expansion in that regard?
Yeah, so I think really the hub that we developed in Rukungiri only works for that area, because as soon as you start to get too far away from your farmers and your companion farmers, you can't have a network, right? You have to be able to see people. We can't do Zoom for everything, and so absolutely we're looking to expand into other regions. So, and not even necessarily within Uganda. We're talking to people about doing work in Kenya, Zambia, South Africa. So I think this model works in other systems. It doesn't just, and to throw it really wide, it doesn't just have to be ponds. We are working also with a mangrove system at the moment. We're sort of developing that. So I think the point, what we try to do when we set this up is to create a system that can enable smallholders to succeed and basically give them everything they need. And that's often the challenge. When you go down to the ground and you see people's pain points, you understand that it isn't just the cost of X, but it's all the other intangible points. And so the model that we've built, I think, provides that, but it does it in a way that's not purely charitable. Of course, our aims are, charitable aims, right? But actually, there's the commercial element there as well, which makes this a viable option, sort of to keep sustaining itself and to be rolled out. So it's early days yet. No one's signed up and said, right, have some money, go and do this elsewhere, go and deliver it. But we are in good conversations with a few people that have pockets big enough to do that. And then the idea is it's self-sustaining, because as the income sort of starts flowing, then you can actually deliver other hubs in other parts. And so we wouldn't need funders at that stage. So the sort of the model, as it were, has been proven and works. And now it's sort of scaling and taking it from there.
Right. I think my observation is that I'm really pleased to see that you've managed to find a way of getting black soldier fly to be accessible to smallholders.
Yeah.
I think I saw the early work on this down at Stellenbosch when they were working there on factory size approaches. And I've also seen where they've been using insect food in Malaysia for fish farming. It's been very successful. So, it's great to see that working there. I guess my thought is that it may be that Aditi might start to think about the idea about how aquaculture could sit within the urban agriculture model, particularly within tanks. But also, I think for both of you, it's the way in which we can see another way in which green and food waste can be recycled back into nutrition for humans, this time via soldier fly and fish. So I think we're starting to see more circular agriculture models emerging, and it's great to see it happening. Okay, I think we're now at a point where everyone's hungry. For everyone, what we're